Hello and welcome to the Quincy Access Television Studios. I'm Mark Crosby. Thank you for joining me for State View, a program that helps you to stay informed and lets you basically know what's happening on Beacon Hill and how that affects you. As in programs past, I do have a guest who is a frequent guest on State View. That is Senator John Keenan. Senator, welcome back. You, of course, are from the Plymouth and Norfolk districts.
Norfolk and Plymouth, right. Representing Quincy, Braintree, Abington, Rockland, Hanover, and Holbrook.
How are things?
They're going well, other than the summer's going by entirely too quickly.
Right, absolutely, it always does. Before we get into some specific acts of legislation, talk about, I guess, the overall formal meetings of the Senate kind of carried into the summer quite a bit this year.
Yes, so we passed the budget, which is kind of the big thing that we do in the spring, and then the goal is to get that in place before the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. And so we were able to do that, and then we spend most of July kind of catching up on other things, local bills. If there's any substantive legislation, we try to get that done by the end of July. Under our older rules, at the end of July, we basically went into informal sessions and would not take up any formal matters. The new rules are a little bit more flexible, so some hearings went all the way through late July, and then next July, which will be the second year of the session, I expect that we'll have things that will go throughout the summer into the fall, which is not what we've done in the past. So this July was pretty busy, and we get to August, it gets relatively quiet. We did have the first week of August, the National Conference of State Legislatures hold their conference, their convention here in Massachusetts, and it was in Boston, and it was a big convention. It was great to have all the people here, and so that kept us busy during the first week of August, and then we're doing a little bit of catch up on other issues as we make our way through August, and we'll start with the hearings again in September.
This will obviously and has impacted not only this state, but others as well. Federal funding.
It is day to day the big unknown. We had a public health hearing sometime mid to late spring, and it was on a Monday morning. I believe it was at 9 a.m. And the Commissioner of Public Health, Dr. Goldstein, came in and started off his testimony by saying, we got word at 10 o'clock last night that we would just cut $110 million. And that's how it's kind of been going. We just don't know what's going to happen. The biggest concern at this stage, it's what will happen with Medicare dollars, Medicaid dollars, particularly Medicaid. Medicare, we're not certain, but Medicaid, which we rely on to help those that can't afford insurance otherwise or need assistance with insurance, and it's a pretty significant number here in Massachusetts. They rely on Medicaid, which is our mass health program. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. Some estimates are that several thousand, tens of thousands of people may lose their Medicaid coverage, and that will then fall upon the state to figure out how to make sure that they have access to care and find the best way to pay for that care.
And we know how expensive health care has become.
Very expensive, and we're finding hospitals struggling because typically the mass health and Medicaid payments and Medicare too, when you're dealing with seniors, those payments are typically lower than what private insurers pay. So hospitals that have a disproportionate share of people covered by mass health are really struggling. And in the past, it's been unique to them, but we're now finding that even beyond that, other hospitals are starting to struggle as well. South Shore Health Service, we just read about, is looking at layoffs. And other hospitals are really concerned about what's coming and whether they'll be able to react. We've tried to set aside some money. We've tried to be as proactive as possible. We've tried to anticipate as much as possible, but we just don't know.
The need is there. It has been.
The need is there. It's growing. You know, it used to be that mass health, people viewed mass health as an insurance provided by the state for people at lower income levels. You make $50,000 or $60,000, depending on your family situation, how many members of the family. You're working a full-time job. You're not able to basically afford private health insurance. And so a lot of people end up going on a mass health plan, or they'll work for employers who will offer them health insurance, but the deductibles are so high or the co-pays are so high that it's just not really great coverage for people. And so as a result, they end up on mass health. And again, there's a lot of people that are working full-time, making a lot of money. That's most of the people on mass health, that's where they're coming from.
Right. I want to start with sports betting and some of the concerns and some of the legislation. I guess some of the legislation that is aimed to curtail some of the activity?
We passed sports betting here in Massachusetts, and the way we passed, at least in the Senate, the first vote we had was a voice vote, meaning there was no roll call vote on it. And then the second vote we had was on what they call conference committee report, meaning the Senate passed a version of the bill, the House passed a version of the bill. They were different, come together to try to come up with a cohesive bill, and that comes out and you can only vote yes or no without any amendments. So the first one was a voice vote. The conference committee report was a yes vote, a yes or no vote, a roll call vote. I voted yes on it. As I look back, learning what I've learned, seeing what's happened with sports betting, I would not vote the same way if I had to do it over again. We have seen sports betting go far beyond, I think, what anybody who voted for it anticipated. You can bet on just about everything now. Somebody was kidding the other day and said, it's really bad when somebody calls the helpline and has a bet with their friend as to whether the person who's going to answer the gambling help hotline is male or female.
Really?
It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but that's, you basically can vote on anything at all. But as it relates to sports, you can vote prop bets on individual performance. You can do micro bets on whether somebody's going to throw a fastball or a curveball. You name it, you can bet on it. And there's a show on last night that on a documentary that revealed the most popular sport for a long time people were betting on was ping pong out of Taiwan, because it's 24/7.
Really?
And I don't think anybody anticipated that. And so the legislation that we've filed doesn't look to ban sports betting, but really looks to put guardrails in place. There's a lot of talk about bettors, gamblers being responsible, and people should be, but we're looking to hold the industry responsible as well, to make sure that they are acting responsibly. And we view it as a burgeoning public health issue, based on what we're hearing from so many different fronts.
And talk about the Commonwealth's Public Health Trust Fund. You'd want, or the legislation would ask the amount to be doubled.
It would look to increase the amount that goes into that public health trust fund, with the idea that that money can be used for a public health response to what we're already seeing and what we know is coming. Europe's about at least 10 years ahead of us on this. And so there are lessons to be learned from them. And the biggest lesson to be learned is this is a public health crisis. Gambling is addictive, and sports betting is a highly addictive form of gambling, because you can bet on your phone 24/7, and you can bet every 2, 3, 4 seconds. As fast as you can work your fingers on that phone, you can place a bet. And so it is highly addictive.
Prohibit sports betting advertising during broadcasts of sporting events and advertisements containing language that misrepresents a customer's odds at winning.
We've all seen the ads. It's kind of no sweat bets. We'll pay you. You can't lose. Here's free money to bet with. Those are designed to make people believe that the act of placing a sports bet is with limited consequence or limited chance of losing. Almost like you can't lose.
Right.
And that's deceptive. So we're looking to address that. And then part of that is to address the issue of in-game advertisements. The NFL, I believe, has a program where they only allow one sports betting ad per quarter. So they know it's an issue.
Right.
And yet they don't want to give up that revenue, and the networks don't want to give up that revenue. They know it's a problem. When people are betting on something during a game and they lose, they'll chase that loss. I'll place another bet so I can win it back. Or if they happen to win on a bet, I'm playing with house money, I'll bet again. And again, it just fuels this constant betting, which leads to problem gambling and to addictive behaviors.
I know it's big on the college circuit.
Big on college circuit, big on high school circuits. Charlie Baker has been pretty public about the problems that are occurring on college campuses. In this documentary that was on CNN, he highlighted the problems that they faced during the NCAA basketball tournament, where fans were standing behind the benches yelling at players, "You cost me money." And it got so bad there were death threats, and the NCAA gave full 24-hour security to certain teams because of the threats that they were receiving from sports bettors. Threats along the lines of, "I know what exit you're going to take leaving the building. I'm going to kill you." This is what Governor Baker conveyed. He's now head of the NCAA. This is what he conveyed. He would like to see no in-game bets. He'd like to see just bets on who's going to win or lose. And yet it's You can bet on somebody, in pro basketball, baseball, pitches, free throws, you name it.
Right, it was simpler
Yes.
years ago,
Right.
really. Let's talk about the amount of taxes collected and how Massachusetts is behind.
We have an excise on the platforms, not on individual bets or winnings. We have an excise that we place on the platforms. It's tied to their license fee, and we have it on casinos as well. Every state that has allowed, pretty much every state that has allowed sports betting has done this. Our rate is at 20%. Neighboring communities are at 51%. And so obviously the platforms here in Massachusetts, where we have a bigger population, are making a lot of money. And so we'd like to see that excise increased from 20% to 51% to make it consistent with other states and to use the proceeds for a public health response to what we know is a problem and is a growing problem.
Prohibit sports betting operators from paying employees based on a percentage of how much they convince a customer to pay.
So they call host. And they're pretty well known. Oftentimes people will get credits at casinos for a night stay at a hotel. That's been a longstanding practice. This is something that goes way beyond that. I've talked to individuals who are in recovery, in a recovery group, who highlighted that they were contacted by the sports betting platforms because they hadn't bet in a while. They hadn't heard from these folks, and so they reached out by text, email, phone calls. One individual conveyed the story to me that he was in recovery, struggling, but in recovery, and all of a sudden he finds himself front row at a Philadelphia 76ers game, and after the game meeting Joel Embiid, the star of the Philadelphia 76ers, and his wife said, "How did this all happen?" I said, "No, I relapsed. They offered this to me." Interestingly, the head of the American Gambling Association, acknowledges that hosts are a problem and says, well, there's consequences if they're found to be doing that. And then he was asked, have there been any consequences? Has anybody lost their job right now? He goes, well, not that I know of. And so I look at that. What our legislation would do would be to ban that practice. You can't make money based on how much you get somebody to gamble. And I'd like to think that the Gambling Association, the Gaming Association, the national group would agree with us because they believe there already are consequences, such as losing your license or being banned. Well, then join us on the legislation would be my message or my request to them.
Sports agents and promoters.
We want to make sure that they can't bet. When we passed the sports betting law initially, there was a group of people that could not bet, those that might have inside information.
Sure.
And there was a couple that were left out, and those are the ones that were left out. Sports agents, they may know something about what's going on in a team that others may not know, and they might be able to use that information themselves or trade on that information. We haven't heard any instances of that occurring, but again, we want to just put these guardrails in place to prevent some of these behaviors.
And I guess also let's talk about limiting how much is bet per day.
So go back, I mentioned about what the NFL was doing. The NFL, through one of their programs, says, they advise people, don't bet more than you can bet. Don't bet more than you can afford to lose.
Right.
Plan on how much you can afford to lose. Our legislation would put in what they call an affordability check. It would put the burden on the sports betting platform to determine whether somebody has the ability or the resources to cover their bets. And the levels are pretty high. For the average gambler, the average bettor, it really wouldn't impact them. But if you're betting more than $1,000 a day, for instance, or $10,000 a month, then the platform would have the responsibility to find out whether you have the resources in a bank account to cover it, so that you're not going in debt in terms of credit, or that you're not using money that you might have taken from the Parent Teachers Association at the school or embezzled from work, which is common among gamblers who are struggling with addiction. And so the idea is really to make sure that before you go down the path towards making these big bets, that you have the ability to pay for them. And I think that's responsible behavior by the platform to make sure that they're not taking bets from people who they know can't afford it.
The link between gambling and suicide.
Among gamblers, sports bettors are the most likely to think about, consider, attempt, or even succeed at suicide. It's pretty well documented. And the industry doesn't want to talk about that. They keep saying, well, we have a responsible gambling program in place. And with that responsible gambling program, and a person that we work with, Harry Levant, says this as well, is that if you end up having a problem gambling, it's your fault. And to some degree, that's true. There's personal responsibility that has to be had. But the industry doesn't want to talk about knowing, with all the data that they have, and they've got everything imaginable on each better, how they bet, how often they bet, what time of day.
Which is going to lead me to actually sharing that customer data with.
Right, we'd like to get that data. We think what they're supposed to give it to us, they haven't, because they know it's there, and they use it to target people. And so we want to use it in an anonymous way to come up with a public health response. But we know that this is what they do. They target people, and they try to get as much money out of people. You think about the tobacco industry made their money not off of somebody who had one cigarette a week. It was people who were addicted to tobacco nicotine. The drinking industry makes their money off of people who don't have a beer or a glass of wine once a week. They make their money off of people who drink most. And the sports betting industry is no different. They make the vast majority of their money off of those who have problems with gambling, addiction issues. Now, the industry will call them they're bettors who are challenged. That's the challenge was the word that I heard the other day. But they make their money. There's a couple of studies out, one out of Rutgers University for New Jersey and one out of Connecticut. And I think it was the one out of Connecticut that shows over 70% of the revenue generated in that state is generated from about 7% of people.
How many?
7% of those who are betting. And so those who bet the most generate the most revenue. And that's why the industry targets them with that data that we'd like to have. That's why they have the host contacting them, because they know that's where the money is. They don't admit to that, but the data shows it. And when, confronted with the data on these things, I can't remember what the quote was. It was, I'll see if I can find the response, because it really was incredible. I'm not sure that I have it here. But it was, when confronted with the data about who's betting, how much they're betting, and all of that, and that's problem, that's addiction, the head of the American Gaming Association said that's academia wrapped up in advocacy. That's how we refer to it.
Yikes.
It's pretty clear science. It's pretty clear data. It's an addictive product, and those who are addicted spend the most, and the industry makes the most off of those who are addicted.
Right. So where do we stand on sports betting currently?
It's legal in Massachusetts, as it is, I think, in 39 other states, plus D.C., I believe, at this stage. We filed a bill. It's called the Better Health Act, B-E-T-T-O-R, Health Act. The bill hopefully will come up for a hearing in September. We're looking to have it moved out of committee and hopefully to the floor of the Senate and the floor of the House. It's going to be a challenge because the industry obviously is not going to want this to pass. But we are hearing more and more from people who have struggled with sports betting. We're hearing from parents, wives, children of those who have struggled with sports betting. We had a woman came in the office a few weeks ago and told a story about how in a South Shore community, two sets of parents, not knowing what the other was doing, came to her and indicated that they had sons who were thousands of dollars in debt, and they were high school students. And so it's there, it's growing. We're just trying to address it as quickly as we can, as thoroughly as we can. But again, recognizing we're not going to ban it, but we just want the operators to act responsibly.
One of the items I want to bring up, maybe out of order, is probably because it's just kind of fresh off the press, cell phones in schools. Yes,
the Senate passed a bill that would would not allow the use of cell phones in schools from bell to bell, from the time a student gets to school to the time a student leaves school, and then in school-related activities as well. There were, I think, 7 bills that were filed in the Senate addressing this issue. I had filed one of the bills. And so Senator Lewis kind of brought all these bills together. He did a great job, worked to come up with a thorough, comprehensive bill. Senate President was a strong advocate for it as well. Everybody came together on it. It went up to the Senate, and it passed. And so now we're hoping that the House of Representatives will take up a cell phone bill as well, and that will get it to the governor's desk.
Not only, I mean, I've noticed firsthand, not only is it distracting when children, well, not only children, adults are concentrating on their phones, But it's actually, and I've experienced this too, it can be a form of bullying.
Yes. It's bullying. It's all kinds of social issues that have worsened because of cell phones.
And you say that, it just brings this thought to my mind. My son, when he was playing baseball, he was at I think it was a regional championship game. They had played a game before lunch, then they were scheduled to play after lunch. Well, the coach took them out to lunch. They're seated at this long table, and they're all on their phones. So I asked my son, what are you doing? Well, I'm talking to the kid across the way.
I was on the train going to work one day, and these two young girls got on the train, and they sat next to each other, and they both had their phones out, and one giggled, and I noticed the other one kind of laughed, and then they looked. That's how they were communicating to each other.
Right.
They were sitting right next to each other. John Vilas, a state senator, conveyed the story that he talked to one of the principals in his district about cell phone use, and in that particular school, they had put a ban in place. And the principal said, if you walked into the school a month before or 2 weeks before the ban went into place, you'd go into the cafeteria and it'd be really quiet. Everybody was on their phones. In between classes, kids would be on their phones. Even during classes, kids would be on their phone. He said, we banned them. You went into the cafeteria, the kids were laughing, joking, having fun, some were studying. He said it was an entirely different atmosphere. Kids were being kids.
Right. It's a loss. I mean, coming at it from one that didn't have cell phones in school at a young age, or actually, I don't think even in college, but at a young age, in grammar school, in any event, and middle school and high school, you miss that interaction, and you wonder how healthy it is to not have that interaction.
It's an important part of development, social growth. If I think back when I was in college, some of the best moments in college were if you had a little time after lunch or dinner, you just sat in the cafeteria and you just talked. You talked about foolish things, you talked sports, you talked about the world, but you just talked. And you learned from everybody you were sitting with. And and that has disappeared. And so I think it's so important to put this law in place, let kids be kids again, let teachers teach again to students who are more attentive. I think it's a win for teachers, for the educational process, for students, the educational process, and for the social emotional growth of the young people.
And before we leave this topic, I want to say in some school districts, they actually they're looking to ban the use of cell phones even on the bus.
The bill that was passed would draw a distinction as to whether it's like a field trip or an after-school event that's tied to the school. The ban would extend to that. And so, and then the municipalities do have some flexibility as to how they will implement a ban. There's some basics that they have to meet. And then the state will provide, DESE, the Department of Elementary Secondary Education, will provide some templates if communities are interested. But we'll leave it up to communities to do a lot of the detail work, but the idea is from start to finish, and even if that includes some extra after-school activities that they're tied to school, that talk to your friends, stay off the phone.
Right.
Don't sports bet. We've heard that students were sports betting at schools.
Right.
We had a high school intern in our class who said sports betting was huge, and he went to a private high school. And he showed us how an 18-year-old could log on and get onto a sports betting platform. And he said it did happen in class, but even more so right after school and nights, people that age, that's what they were doing. And again, not socializing in a normal, healthy way.
Not good.
No.
Let's talk about another kind of item in the news, and that's, I suppose, democracy and voting and mail-in voting.
So President Trump made an announcement last week that he would issue an executive order that would ban mail-in voting. Interestingly, he seemed to have gotten the idea at that moment from a conversation with Vladimir Putin. And he conveyed it in an interview with Sean Hannity, I think it was, right after his meeting with Putin. And he said, you know what he told me? He told me that I would have won the election in 2020 except for mail-in voting, and mail-in voting is fraud, and that we're the only country in the world that allows mail-in voting. We're wrong on every front. we're not the only country in the world that allows mail-in voting. There's no indication that mail-in voting processes cost the president the election in 2020. It's just beyond that. If he issues an executive order that has to do with mail-in voting, he would be in violation, I believe, of the Elections Clause of the Constitution, which leaves the conduct of elections up to the states. It's pretty clear in the Constitution, very clear. In fact, a recent court decision said there is no dispute. The president doesn't have the authority to do anything relative to elections. It rests with the states and to some degree with Congress. The president has no authority. Back in March, he issued an executive order that had to do with a bunch of different things relative to voting, particularly citizenship, proof of citizenship. That was challenged in court by many attorney generals. That has been blocked. The court has basically said there's a reasonable likelihood that that law is unconstitutional, and the court there said it's pretty clear that the president does not have any authority, and Supreme Court decisions have upheld that. The president does not have authority to do anything relative to elections, and yet he asserts that he does, and he asserts that the states basically just have to do what he says because he is the federal government. That's essentially what his tweet said, and it's just he's not the federal government. There's also a thing called Congress, and he just can't do it.
And on that front, what do you think of these deployments?
To the municipalities, to the cities?
Pretty much sanctuary cities.
Yes. I think it's terrible. I think the image of having armed troops on the streets of our city is unnecessary. It is in reaction to a problem that doesn't exist to the extent the president claims it does. There's crime in our cities. Crime rates generally are down, but our cities are generally safe. I've been down to Washington, D.C. within the last year and a half. I walked at 10 o'clock at night. I went down to the various monuments. It was a very drizzly night, and I felt entirely safe. I was just recently down in New York City riding the subway for a couple of days. Felt very safe. I've been to Chicago a couple of times. Have never felt unsafe there. Certainly there are pockets within municipalities, within cities, where there are crime issues, but I think this is just a pretext, honestly, to have citizens feel that having armed troops in our cities is normal. The situation does not give cause for that type of activity. Just a quick story. I went over to Jordan. I met one time with the head of the Jordan Intelligence Division, and he would not, it was myself and maybe about 8 or 10 others. He wouldn't speak to us in English, even though he was in English, because he didn't want to misstate anything. And the instructions we got was that he would answer questions, but if he could not answer a question, he would just smile. So I asked him a question about the use of Jordanian troops within the country, and he smiled. But I asked that question, that was probably 5 or 6 years ago now, because I was aware that we don't do that in the United States. I was curious whether Jordan did it. And now here we are with troops, National Guard troops, that should be under control of governors, but the president has taken control of them, and he's put them on our streets. It's something that so rarely happened here. And if it has happened, it's happened because there's a legitimate need. There's no legitimate need. I hope he doesn't send them to Massachusetts. It's really, really disturbing.
And he could, because we are a sanctuary city, a sanctuary state.
Well, there's no real definition as to what a sanctuary state is. Boston has the Trust Act as a municipality. Massachusetts basically, does cooperate with the federal government when there's an arrest and fingerprints are sent and all those types of things. So it's unknown what a sanctuary state is. But we are perceived as being perhaps too friendly to immigrants, or as the president would call them, illegals, aliens. So, I don't know whether he'll send troops here. I hope that our congressional delegation will speak up on it, and I hope that all elected officials and all citizens will speak out against any sort of action like that.
Well, Senator, thank you for joining me here today. Again, a program that has a lot of information. Thanks to you. So you're welcome back at any point.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you at home for watching. And please remember to support the local access station in the community in which you reside. Take care.